an Indian carrot soup. We're going to use garam masala and turmeric in it for our spices and ginger. And then we're going to make some kind of Italian BMT sandwiches using our leftover homemade buns that we made the other day. And we're going to bake up some applesauce loaves. So let's start off by getting our onions and veggies kind of caramelized and going for our soup. And then we can work on our apple loaves and then our sandwiches. I'm going to start by putting in about, a tablespoon or so of olive oil into my little Dutch oven here. And turn on our heat. And then I am down to like the last of everything in my house. So we are going to be using up this onion, and it's this very, very small onion. And I've got some carrots and whatnot, but this is kind of a make a soup with whatever little scraps I have. The same thing, I'm down to my last of my butter and everything. Been really busy today, so I do have a grocery order coming later. But this is gonna have to make do until then. There we go. But we truly did eat everything out of our house during this snowstorm. We're down to bare minimums of everything. So we're going to start by putting in one small diced up onion here. We'll let that saute here. And while we're letting that saute, I'm going to prep up some of my other root vegetables to go in there so we can get a good saute on them. I'm out of my fresh garlic, so I'll have to use my garlic, but I always have this as a backup in there, so we'll throw that in just a second. But I have a whole bunch of rainbow carrots that we are going to cube up. We'll peel and cube up some sweet potatoes and some butternut squash. So we kind of have a good mixture of root vegetables. We'll make kind of the creamy vegetable bisque base of our soup. And then we're going to use ginger paste, garam masala, which is like an Indian spice, and then some turmeric to kind of season up our soup. So let's start with our butternut squash. Actually, let's start with our carrots because they're the firmest of my vegetables here. And we're going to give them a nice little peel, and then we'll dice them up for this. So we have a good amount of them. They actually kind of partially froze out in my refrigerator outside because it's so cold here. And that's fine because we're going to be cooking and stewing them, and we'll puree them up into a lovely little bisque. But the carrot is going to add a nice, really lovely, it's going to be a stronger flavor in this soup, which will be wonderful with the ginger, but we'll get a nice smooth texture from both the butternut squash and the sweet potatoes, which will add a little bit more bulk than just the carrot. So it'll be a nice little kind of mix for both of them. And then we'll do our applesauce bread, which is one of my recipes that uses just a little bit of butter. I only need 1/4 of a cup, which is all the butter I had left. Good thing I have about 5 pounds being delivered here in a little bit. So we'll be back up to our regular, stock here. But I went through a lot, and we made a lot of baked goods this week for it. So I'll get these. Quite a bit of carrots. So you can see I've got white, some yellow, purple, and one orange. They all have pretty much the same flavor. I will say the orange is always the sweetest and the white is the least sweet of them. But for this dish, it's not going to matter so much about the sweetness of the carrots as much as that nice carroty flavor. Okay. We'll get these cubed up. And I'm doing my carrots first because out of my 3 root vegetables, the carrots are the firmest, which means they're going to take the longest to get nice and tender. So we're going to chop them up and get them in our pan sauteing. I'm going to cut them up a little bit smaller so that they, of course, will get tender a little bit faster during the saute process. And then we'll let them simmer in a nice chicken stock.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? I'm getting the groceries delivered, so I have a lot of options. We'll see, what looks good. I do have some cod, so I might be doing some, fried fish or something tonight because, I haven't had fresh fish in a while, and I always love to use it right away. So maybe that, but we'll see. Plans change, on there. I was trying to stick away for this grocery week. I was like, no chicken. I did buy a pack of chicken, but no chicken for a while. We're going to have some other items until then because I'm all chickened out for a while, all chicken and baconed out.
So did you go grocery shopping?
I just placed an Amazon Fresh order. I was kind of busy today, and I've got some soccer practice I have to get to in a little bit. So I just did an order, and it will be delivered because we just live right outside of Nashville. So luckily they deliver here, and their groceries are really, really cheap, which is lovely. And they're pretty good because you actually get a lot of whole food groceries in there. So it's kind of like a really good win on there. So I have a big order coming from them. So we'll have that because when I tell you I am down to the bones, I am down. I have got like a cup and a half of regular flour, of like all purpose flour left. I've got a fourth a cup of butter, which we're using. I have eggs and I have milk, but outside of that, I am using up essentially the last of my carrots. I'm out of potatoes, unless I do have some red potatoes and some Yukon, but out of russets, out of all of my basic staples, because last week, right before the storm, we really could not, like the store was just sold out of so many things. So we ate out of a lot of our pantry, which is always nice to do every once in a while because then you can kind of refresh your stock. But it's kind of a big grocery haul for us. Made my husband go out there and clear the pathway so it's ice free, make it nice and safe for our delivery driver, because even though it's been over a week since we had the ice storm, essentially, I guess it's a week exactly, it is still solid chunks of ice out there. Like yesterday, Evie had, she ended up having 4 soccer games, and these are just 30-minute indoor games. And so we had quite a bit of like going around and seeing part of the town, and so many trees down everywhere. It's just crazy how much devastation the ice storm caused. And also, like, even for the main roads, like all the turn lanes were still full of ice. So still pretty bad out there.
A little bug and food.
Oh, thank you, little bug. We appreciate that. There we go. We're adding in our rainbow carrots to get these sauteing up first because they're the firmest of our root vegetables. There we go. Get them a nice little coating on there. That way they can get tender fairly quickly. Our sweet potatoes and our butternut squash, those actually cook up really, really fast once you add in your stock. So I don't have to worry about those quite as much. But I want my carrots going here. So we'll let them start. We'll work on our applesauce bread here to get that in the oven to bake up. So this is a great recipe that uses a little less butter than most of my muffin and baked ones because, again, I'm down to a fourth of a cup. This is the last of my butter. You know me, I bake with butter pretty much everything. So my husband was like, oh, are we not going to have butter to put on it afterwards? And I said, our butter should be here by then. We should have groceries delivered by like 4:30 or something like that. Just depends on there. So I was like, we'll have butter for you to put on your applesauce bread because this is one of his favorite things. So we're going to start with a fourth a cup of our butter melted. And we're going to do a half a cup of our sourdough discard. So being with the applesauce and the sourdough discard, you don't need to use as much of a fat in it that you do with a lot of other baked goods. So that's kind of the nice thing about this recipe. I always like to have a couple recipes that I can bake up that aren't reliant on, staples sometimes. There we go. So you got my half cup of my discard in here. I've got a couple sourdough loaves that I prepped up earlier that I have proofing in the fridge so we can have some fresh sourdough bread later. I made a Italian herbs and cheese loaf, another cinnamon swirl loaf because, again, that is one of my husband's favorites. As you notice, he loves cinnamon. spiced anything. He's like a sweetbread cinnamon dessert type of guy. And let me mix and get this in there.
Question: have you ever tried baked beans in your bread?
I have made a bread with like chickpeas, and I made brownies. I've done brownies with chickpeas and sweet potatoes. And, you know, I like them, but nobody else in my family liked them because you could tell that they were definitely not the base things for it. So, as much as people like to say, oh, you can't tell, you totally can. But I think they're good. But if you have very discerning tastes like my husband and children, when they know I try to make anything like uber healthy, they know. Okay, we're gonna add in our applesauce. We want about a cup of applesauce, which I'm gonna use 2 of these tubs plus a little pouch on here. The tubs have a little bit more in them than the things, but on there. And I always go a little bit like kind of heavier on the applesauce. So when I say a cup, it's like a heaping cup. And then we're gonna add in this applesauce, which is really an apple carrot sauce, but you can't taste the carrot in it.
How much butter is in there?
Only a fourth of a cup of butter, so 4 tablespoons of melted butter. And that's, I think, what's really great about this recipe is if you're running low on butter like I am, actually, I'll throw this away because I am out of it. No butter to be had in this house right now. It's kind of a nice thing to use. Get this carrot before I step on it. But the applesauce and this discard makes the muffin very moist. So it's one of these perfect recipes that you can kind of cancel it out with. We're gonna add in 2 eggs. Surprisingly, I have a lot of eggs. I bought so many eggs last week because I was like, we're gonna be here, we're gonna be eating, so much. And I did a lot of different things for breakfast. We did do eggs a lot, but not as much as I normally do. So we'll pop our yolks in. And I think it's because we didn't go out into the snow because it was just ice. Just one big sheet of ice out there. It's crazy. There's like videos of people like ice skating in their yards because it is just a big sheet of ice. There we go. So we'll get a good mix around. Mix those eggs into our base here. Okay. And then we're going to add in our sugar and then our spices and then our flour. And I'm telling you, I'm down to the bare minimum of my flour too. And last week I restocked up and I had 15 pounds of each. And I still have about a pound or 5 pounds of bread flour left. But I've gone through 15 pounds of flour in this last week. We made a lot of baked stuff, a lot of bread because we had no bread. We're going to use a cup of brown sugar. I'm using light brown sugar, but I will say dark brown sugar is also fantastic in this bread because that molasses and the apple flavors just work out really well together. But pop that in there. Add in. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse because we've got a little bit of brown sugar on them. We'll mix that into our base here. And then we're going to add in our spices and our baking soda to get there. So we're going to do a teaspoon of baking soda. This with the eggs and the sourdough discard are going to kind of give it a pop. They'll all work together. So 1 teaspoon. And then we need about a half a teaspoon of salt. We're going to do a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then I'm going to use a tablespoon of cinnamon and about a half a tablespoon of my homemade apple pie spice, which really is a mixture of like cinnamon and cardamom. That's not a tablespoon. This is a tablespoon. But it gives you just a nice little pop of flavor on there that are just kind of what you find in apple pie. Give it a smell. I made it a while back. So I've got some ginger, cardamom, cinnamon. Ooh, I'm breathing in my eye. But good stuff in here.
Paula sent you.
Well, thank you.
And do you have a favorite grocery store to shop at?
I don't have a favorite grocery store per se. I shop at a variety of grocery stores. And it really depends on what I need because every store has different things. When I'm wanting to stock up and have a bulk shop, I will, might get my Costco because I love the Costco, but I can't get all my little things at Costco that I like. But I do love the meat at Costco. Love, love, love there. But I shop Aldi's because they're really great prices and they have a lot of great produce too. But again, not a huge variety. Amazon Fresh is kind of my new thing that I've found and I really like it, which has actually a really large variety and pretty decent prices. Now, again, it doesn't have everything, but they have a lot of great stuff. And they really came through during our little kind of everyone is panic buying last week because of the ice storm before it hit or the snowstorm, and everything was sold out of milk and bread and everything like that. Well, I'm going to tell you, Amazon Fresh had everything, so they kind of came through. All the meat was gone. I was able to get a lot of chicken. So you can't really panic buy when you have to order online. So going through, I've got to get all of my flour in here. I need 1 cup of flour. So between the applesauce and the sourdough discard, that gives you your base for these muffins. Make sure. There we go. I told you. Look how much. That's all I had left. All I had left. Just this teeny tiny bit in there. It's like a third of a cup. So good thing. Good thing I'm getting more. But and then I have Publix, which is my grocery store that is really close to where I live. And I'll go there, a lot of times when I'm just got to swing by and pick up something. So I have a lot of great places I do. I mean, there's places that I love, like I love Whole Foods, but that's like whole paycheck too. So, you can't get everything you want on there. So I kind of shop around. I like to, get deals and what's on sale, especially with a large family. Whenever you can save a penny here and there, it's always nice. Okay, we've got our applesauce loaf. We just make sure that flour's mixed in. And we'll spray it down our little bake pan down and we'll bake these up. I don't think I set it out, so let me grab it. Okay, you can do these also in muffin tins or you can do them in a loaf or a bundt. You just have to kind of adjust the baking time. So with these being in our little applesauce pans, they're going to bake at 350 for about 22 or so minutes. We'll give them a good check on there. You just never know how liquidy your applesauce is, and sometimes you might need to bake it a little bit longer. Muffins will be closer to 20 minutes. The bigger the pan, the loaf pans, you're going to have to go longer time. Like an actual loaf pan, it's going to be like 35 to 40 minutes just to get that center baked all the way through. Which is why I love the mini loaves because they're already perfectly sized out on here. And then we'll make a nice vanilla glaze to go over the top on here because my husband was talking about how he just loves my classic vanilla glaze. And that's one of the things he always had growing up was applesauce bread with vanilla glaze. And so I was like, I can make you your classic, especially since I don't got any butter anyways. So it's not like I can make the brown sugar glaze I normally make with applesauce. I'm going to go through. We're going to give a nice little spoon in for each one, and then we'll even them out. Now, if you wanted to add in some more bougie things, you could add in some pecans, walnut, raisins. You could add in some diced apples if you like dice them small, toss them with a little bit of cinnamon and sugar to give you some nice apple like chunks in it. You could definitely do that as well. But sometimes just the simplicity of a plain loaf is the best. I find if I try to add too many mix-ins, my kids just prefer simplicity. Now, if you want to make these, jazz these up, make them a little bit more healthy, you could add in some flaxseed and some oats, and this works out really, really well with that.
The kettle sent you a gift.
Oh, well, thank you, the kettle. We appreciate that. Here, we're going to go.
Do you have the measurements for the mini loaf pan?
You know what? I've never actually taken out and measured how much goes into each one. But if I would have a guess, I would say these are looking somewhere between a cup and a half per loaf.
No, I think for the total dimensions.
Oh.
You're talking about they only have a small toaster oven.
Oh, a small so this looks like it's about a 9 by 13-inch pan. So your basic like kind of cake pan, your bigger rectangular one for it. But if you have smaller, like you could bake this up in an 8 by 8-inch pan or mini loaves. You just have to adjust the time. Anytime you go where you have more surface area close together, it's going to take longer to bake because that center is not getting as much direct heat as these are all the way around. So you can always adjust and bake it in there. You bake it in little bundt loaves, a loaf pan. Again, just going to take a little bit more time. And with a toaster oven, you're probably going to have to adjust your times anyways, because a toaster oven is a small confined area, which means your heat transfers a lot faster than a bigger oven. So it will cook a little bit faster to begin with. Okay, we're going to just clean up our pan just a smidge. That way we don't have as much work to do later. Because otherwise it will bake on and then you got to scrub your pan a lot more. And then we're going to go pop these in the oven for this. And then we can work on our soup. I'm going to give it a quick stir. There we go. So these are going to go in 350 for about 22 minutes. I will check them and see if they need another minute or two. Again, applesauce, sometimes you get it. It's a little bit more runny than other times. And sometimes it's like thicker. So you just have to depend on, whether you got the soupy batch of applesauce or not. If there is variety, there is a change. There is differences. Especially if you make it homemade. I find your applesauce, when you make it homemade, is much thicker than the store-bought, as in you don't water it down as much. So that one typically cooks up a little bit faster. Okay. We've got our carrots and our onions in here. These are rainbow carrots that we have sauteing up here with our onions. We're going to dice up our sweet potatoes and our butternut squash, and then we'll add in some spices. I'll add in some broth, coconut milk, let that simmer for a little while on it. Grab a spoon, and we're going to scrape out our seeds for our butternut squash. And then, you know what, before we can scrape out the seeds too. And then we can peel and kind of cut it. There we go. When I like to buy like the whole produce because it's a lot cheaper than buying the pre-cut up stuff. And you don't need quite as much. Like one big butternut squash, I can make typically around 3 different soups from it, depending on, what I'm doing. I can make a full soup using just the top half of just being a pure butternut squash soup. And then I think the other day I used some of it for cubed up in a soup, and then we're going to puree it for this one as well. So let's see the best way. I'm going to just peel it using my knife, using just kind of holding my blade close to it and then just kind of peeling it off to just get that waxy skin off on the outside. It's much easier than trying to use a peeler. because squash, typically like this, has been waxed by the grocery store to prevent it from going bad. And so it's really hard to peel with a traditional peeler. Um, so I find, and it's such an awkward shape that it's just, again, a little bit easier to do a knife peeling with it. There we go. Now, butternut squash soup is really, when you cook it up, it has a good moisture content. It's a lot softer, so it will cook up fairly faster. Sweet potatoes are a bit denser, a bit thicker, so they'll actually absorb more liquid in your soup than if you are going to use straight up butternut squash. And carrots are kind of they have a very low moisture content on them, but they don't absorb up as much liquid either. So using a mixture of these are actually going to give us a pretty good velvety texture to the soup, which will be lovely. Just cube them up. We'll throw them in here with the carrots again, going smaller so that when it simmers through, they will cook up fairly quickly. Get these in here. We'll give this a nice toss with our little rainbow carrots. And the sauteing process will give out a nice rich flavor on the vegetable and speeds up the cooking process as well. I've got 4 like teeny tiny baby sweet potatoes that we're going to peel up on here. I again typically like to do a knife peel on sweet potatoes because they are kind of a funky shape and they typically are a little bit dry when you do a regular peeling on it. Baby sweet potatoes tend to be a bit more moist than the bigger giant ones, which have more of a whiter flesh on it. These will have a nice kind of, bright orange flesh on them. But we'll cube them up because these are like the smallest sweet potatoes ever. And we'll get them in there. But sweet potatoes are really great using in a vegetable bisque because they are really great at thickening up because they have a lot of fiber in them and they absorb a lot of liquid to give you that base. So they give you a lot more soup than you think. Like they can produce a lot more soup. Look at these. On here. It was one of those things where one of these days I'm going to try to find all purple sweet potatoes and all purple carrots and do a purple sweet potato and carrot soup so that you have like a really lovely purple bisque. I think it'll be so pretty. But I haven't been able to find purple sweet potatoes in a while because every time I try to go find them, they're sold out. And I love a purple sweet potato. If you've never actually had one, they have more of a florally taste to them than like a regular one. It's just a slightly different flavor, but they're so pretty when you cook them up. I used to get them all the time when I would make homemade baby food for my kids when they were little. And they're so pretty. I once did like a sweet potato casserole with them. And it was so interesting because the white marshmallow, like contrasting with the purple, was so cool. There we go. Okay, we've got our sweet potatoes here. I'm going to just dice these up and then we'll throw them in there. And then we'll get some spices in there so that can heat up in our pan as well before we add in our liquid, because I always like to heat up the spices because that heat really brings out the flavor a little bit more. But we're going to dice these up nice and small so they cook up pretty quickly. But again, the butternut squash and the sweet potatoes are going to get tender much quicker than the carrots, which is why I put the carrots in first. And then we'll let those simmer for a little bit. We'll make our sandwiches and we will get our make our glaze for our applesauce loaves. Slide this in here. Give this a good stir and kind of coat them up. There we go. And you can see those carrots are getting a really great saute. Lost one overboard. I always like that. Okay. Set my hands real quick. And we're going to get our spices in here. I'm just going to get all of my little peels out of the way. Clean up my area just a smidge. For our spices, I'm going to use a little garlic. Normally I would use fresh garlic, but I ran out of that as well. We're getting on to our very end of everything. And then I've got some turmeric and some garam masala. We'll use a little bit of black pepper and ginger paste. That ginger paste will be really wonderful with the carrot, and it kind of works really well on those flavorings here. I'm going to make a well. I'm going to put my garlic in there. We're going to do a nice, good kind of heaping spoonful of it. If I had fresh garlic, I would use probably like 5 or 6 cloves, but we're out. I'll have more later. But always keep this as a backup because, you know, it's always lovely to have. Give this a nice little saute in here. Just a little bit of that direct heat. And then I've got some ginger paste here. If you don't have ginger paste, you can use dried ginger. I'm going to use a good amount, about probably around a tablespoon. If I was going to use dried ginger, I'd use a little bit less, probably closer to a teaspoon, because dried ginger is a bit stronger in flavor than ginger paste. Let that heat up as well. Kind of coat it around, and then we're going to add some of our spices. With that garlic and that ginger already have a really wonderful smell to it. We're going to use a little bit of turmeric, about a teaspoon of dried turmeric. It should be, you know, we're about done with that one too. Running out of everything. And then some garam masala, which I'm going to use about, I'm going to use a good, 2 teaspoons of this. There we go. Which has a kind of, it's an Indian spice blend, which I use in a lot of different Indian dishes, which I really love on here. But it will give it a nice kind of flair. We're going to use some coconut milk in this dish as well, which will kind of mellow out the spices in the end, but it will be really lovely. There we go. Perfect. We'll let those saute just for a second. A lot of times letting that heat hit those spices will allow them to blend better into the broth more. So we'll let them kind of give a quick little blend here. And then we're going to add in our broth and our scuba bouillon. So I still will be using water bouillon. We'll let that simmer. Then we'll add in our coconut milk. Give this a good stir. There we go. That should be about it. You don't need to let them simmer too long, but about a minute or so works really, really well to bring out those flavors. I'm going to add in about 1 cup of water right now. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of deglaze the bottom of my pan. I'll lift up any of those spices that have toasted on. Kind of stir it around. There we go. And I'll add a little bit more. Kind of 1 cup at a time. Allows that broth base to kind of heat up. And then and just slowly in there so you're just not flooding it with all of your liquid. And that way, if you find that you have too much liquid, you can stop instead of on there. Here we go. And you know what? I think I'm going to just stick with about 3.5 cups of liquid because we're going to be adding another can of coconut milk. And so I want to, I don't want it too liquidy because I want to have a nice thick base for it. So we'll turn this up and then we're going to add in a scoop of our chicken bouillon. You could also use a vegetable bouillon. Either one works really well for this. I'm going to use chicken because I love chicken bouillon. I think it works a little bit nicer with it. Has a little bit more mild coloring for it, but vegetable bouillon also works really well. We're going to do a nice heaping spoonful because we need this is going to act as our salt base too. So it's going to season up all 3.5 cups plus the extra liquid from the coconut milk. So you want to make sure you have enough bouillon in there to season it up, give you that nice flavor. You don't have to add any extra salt. Okay. We'll let that simmer here. Come to a nice simmer, boil it up for a second while we work on our sandwiches. And then we'll make our glaze here in a little bit. I'll slide this out of the way. So the other day we made some homemade hamburgers. And I made a dozen hamburgers and we didn't use up all or made a dozen hamburger buns and we didn't use up all the buns because I told you 2 of my kids don't eat buns with their hamburgers. I know, a little bit weird. But I have them. We're gonna make some sandwiches out of them. I think we'll do 3 because these are gonna be big sandwiches and we can cut them in half and that way we'll have 6 sandwiches with them with our soup. But these are just a homemade yeast hamburger bun. I'm going to cut them in half, toast them up on my griddle pan here for this. But so delicious. They're a brioche bun. So I used milk, yeast, sugar, butter, egg inside them, nice, soft. I think we made these about 2 days ago, so they're still really soft and wonderful. We're going to toast them up on here. That way we'll have a nice, lovely sandwich, which is, I think, one of the best things to use making your own buns is they're better than like a store-bought bun because you can also use them for sandwiches. They're just delicious bread, like a homemade roll. But they're light enough to be a hamburger bun because you don't want a super dense hamburger bun. So we'll get these guys. Toast them up. We're just going to do a dry toast on them because, again, we're out of butter. I could actually put a little bit of mayo because mayo works as a substitute of butter for a lot of times, but we'll just keep it like this.
Do you have the recipe for the hamburger buns?
You know what? I think I did that off screen, so will probably I'll make a recipe card for our members for them because that was one of our favorite ones for that on there. But maybe I'll do a little tutorial through it because I did make that off screen because they were ones that required a double rise on them.
Add it to your bread section.
Oh, I'll add it to my bread section for the cookbook. We've made some good progress on it. So hopefully that will be out sooner rather than later on there. I'm going to give a good taste to our broth right here. Delicious. You've got a nice, really fragrant, that garam masala and the turmeric, lovely. And then the notes of the ginger on there blend wonderfully together. Okay, while this is toasting up, let's get our glaze made before we slice up our ham and everything like that. So I'm going to get a little bit of a bowl to mix this glaze up. That way we'll have it ready. I'm just going to do a classic glaze with vanilla, cream, and powdered sugar, which will just be delicious. Let me grab my cream out of here. Cream makes it a little bit richer than using a straight up milk, which I find works out a little bit better. Let me grab my powdered sugar because apparently I forgot to set that out. We'll do a rotation around so that it doesn't get hot. And got my powdered sugar. Okay, for our glaze, we're going to keep it. This is just a really, really simple glaze. You can do it with, I'm using heavy cream, which is going to make it a bit thicker, but you could also do this glaze with milk or half and half, which makes it a bit thinner, and which means it will run clear on your baked good. Cream gives you slightly richer. This doesn't need to use any butter in it, but the cream gives it the nice richness to it. So I've got about 2 or so tablespoons of heavy whipping cream in here. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of vanilla. And if you don't have vanilla extract, you could use vanilla paste. That works well too. We're going to kind of just mix this out. And then we're going to add in our powdered sugar. Go little by little because with the cream, you're going to use a lot less powdered sugar in it than you are going to use with milk or with half and half because it's a lot thicker. So we'll mix it in a little bit and then we'll add some more. So just go little by little for this until we get the consistency of a nice kind of glue that you can drizzle over our loaves. So we put in so far about around a third a cup of powdered sugar, and we'll mix it up and then we'll add a little bit more. But again, super simple, easy glaze on there that just brings a little touch of sweetness to the applesauce bread. Now with, if you're gonna use the milk instead, what I would do is actually use half the liquid. So I used about 2 to 3 tablespoons of milk in here, of cream in here. With milk, use like 1.5 because it's going to absorb more powdered sugar. And if you use a lot, you're gonna have a lot of glaze. There we go. And turn down my soup just a little bit. Grab my spoon here. We'll give it a nice stir around, but we've got a lovely boil on it. And then a little bit, we'll be able to blend this up. We'll add in our coconut milk for a second, and then we'll blend it up. And then we can build our sandwiches, which today is a soup and sandwich day because it's like 15 degrees outside. Right now we're in a debate. My kids are like, do you think we'll have school on Monday? Because, they had the whole week off. And I said, I don't know. There's still a lot of places are without power. I heard that like Nashville is not going to have school because they still have, I heard 17 full schools without power and 8 with partial power. And so I was like, even if they get them on, they've got to assess for damages and whatnot. So I told my kids, I'm like, I don't know, because unlike, growing up north, your schools kind of closed down by your town. Here in the South, they do it by county. So the whole county. So it's a lot of area that you need to cover and for whether it's going to get closed down or not. This looks like a pretty good viscosity to our glaze.
But I will say, in Iowa, each county basically has one school.
Yeah, Iowa, that is true. That is true. It's a little bit different here, but I will say the geography and whatnot, we always would be like, thank goodness for these more rural areas. And I know in Nashville, they always used to be like, oh, thank goodness for Jolton, because Jolton was like the northernmost part of it. And when they would get snow, the rest of the county would close there. And so that's kind of like same here. We have like certain areas that, oh, they can't get those country roads and those buses can't go there. I remember as a kid, that's, it was very weird because I grew up in Iowa until I was 10. And then I moved to, right outside of Nashville. And I remember one of the first times it snowed, my sister, she was, we kind of all went to the same school, the middle school and the high school next to us. So we drove to school and we get there and there's nobody there. And we're like, where is everybody? We didn't even think it was going to be a snow day because there was no snow on the ground. It was just flurrying outside, but it was a snow day. And we could not understand that because you only got snow days in Iowa when they ran out of salt and money to plow the roads and they needed to keep the rest of the money to fix the roads after the winter. So you got a few in the late spring for it, but not much outside of that. Very different here. Here, sometimes we get it for the prediction of snow. They're like, we think the snow is going to hit an early morning right when buses are doing the route, so we've got to close school. Okay, let's grab our applesauce muffin or applesauce mini loaves out of there, and then our bread should be toasted up and ready to build those sandwiches. And then we can add in our coconut milk, and we'll finish that off. Let's grab my little lobsters out. Okay, I'm gonna give them a little tap and see if they're ready. You always want to make sure your dome is firm. It is nice and firm. If your dome has a little jiggle to it, bake it for another 1 to 2 minutes because the jiggle will cave in because it's not cooked all the way. So, and giving it, this is not going to be, you can easily tap it and you're not going to burn yourself. So just give it a little tap, make sure it's firm. If it's firm, you're good. So here are our beautiful applesauce loaves. And they're a mixture of my like little homemade apple spice apple pie blend with some cinnamon in there. But we've got our like a whole cup of applesauce in there, our half a cup of our applesauce discard, and our remaining 4th cup of butter, the last of the butter in our house. We're gonna set them cool for just a second before we put our glaze on, because if we try to glaze them right now while they're super hot, it's just gonna completely run off, and I want them to run over but not completely off. Let's add in our coconut milk so that can simmer for a minute or two. And then we'll build up our sandwiches. We'll blend our soup on here. We're going to use our just good old coconut milk. Don't use like sweetened coconut milk, like the stuff that you make, like the good coconut cake out. But you want this to have that good cream coconut top on it, but not the super sweet dessert coconut milk stuff. Otherwise, you'll have a very, very sweet soup. We're going to mix this in here. And then when we blend it, it will allow some of those separated like coconut bits in there to kind of really get to a nice smooth texture for our soup. But this is our Indian spiced carrot, butternut squash, and sweet potato soup on there. But we have garam masala, turmeric, ginger are our strong spices that are going to really blend this up and just make it a really lovely soup. And they kind of complement those sweeter flavors of those root vegetables and squash, because I guess butternut squash is not a root vegetable. Okay, we'll bring that up. We'll bring that to a simmer, and then we'll blend that off. Let's see. Good. Nice and toasty on these. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to turn this off, and we'll just let these last ones sit. I'll bring the bottoms up, and we will assemble our sandwiches. So we're going to do kind of like, the good old Subway's Italian BMT, which is ham, pepperoni, and salami, because that's just a good old classic here. So I've got my little ham thing, which I like to buy instead of getting like sandwich meats or sliced meats, because I can use this ham in so many different things. So I can use it for sandwiches, and I can use it in omelets, or we made stuffed naan the other day. I used it in my split pea soup. So it gives me a lot more versatility than just using, say, a ham in a sandwich ham or cubed ham. Can do it all. So we've got our ham here, and then I'm just going to cut off these little out pieces for it because they're not as nice in texture. And you can totally keep them on, but my kids and everyone, they like it off. There we go. So we've got our ham on there. We've got our salami. And you don't need to go like crazy thick on them, but I just, couple slices of each, because you're using multiple of them, the meats together to kind of give you your meat blend on it. And they actually work really, really well together. And then our pepperoni, which gives you a bit of that spicy flavor to it. And then I'm going to use some Gouda cheese, but you want to use kind of a mild cheese. So Munster, provolone, Gouda, Havarti, a kind of a creamier white cheese works well. Cheddar cheese really fights with the pepperoni and the salami. So I always like to just kind of stick with a simpler one. Okay, let's give this soup a quick stir. And then we're going to get our cheese. But I want to give it a nice little stir. And then we'll blend this here in just a second. But let's get our cheese on our sandwiches. That way we can blend and we'll have those ready. Yeah, looks like we're using the mousse today. Yeah. And our good old Gouda. And we'll add our little slices on here. Because going through. Whoop. And that should be good. Now you could always add more if you love it, extra cheesy, but I find 2 slices is good. And then if you wanted to add in lettuce, tomato, all that jazz, we've got our toasted little tops, but we're keeping them pretty simple here because for our kids and us, we like them simple. If it was me, of course, I'd add a bunch more if I had the groceries. Okay, we're going to turn this down. We're going to ladle that in there, blend it off. Then we'll drizzle our, let me get the silicone one more, a little bit better. Then we'll drizzle our applesauce loaves and we'll be ready to serve up. Okay, I've got my little Vitamix here. We're going to use our soup setting and we'll blend it nice and smooth on here. Now, the wonderful part about the sweet potatoes is they're going to add a lot more bulk to it. So it might seem like a little bit runny going in right now, but those sweet potatoes, that butternut squash, those carrots, they will all come together to form a nice, lovely, thick bisque. And we have our can of our coconut milk in here, which will it's going to mellow out some of our stronger spices like the turmeric, the garam masala, the ginger, but enhance those flavors. There we go. And we'll slide all of this up here. I find that this little Dutch oven is like the perfect size when I'm making soups. It fits my blender perfectly.
You have a question? Why are you putting it in the blender?
Because I'm going to blend it into a nice smooth bisque. And you could use an immersion blender for it, but I personally like the smoother texture that the Vitamix gives for it. And I've gone through 2 or 3 immersion blenders in my lifetime as a cook, and they don't hold up to my. Let me grab a little paper towel because I spilled a little bit. So I like to do it in the blender. It gives you nice, really smooth. Immersion blender works really well in the sense that you can just put it in there and you will have less of a mess in the sense of it. But this is going to give you a smoother, more consistent throughout. I'm going to hold it on here. We're going to use my soup setting, which is going to start at low and bring it up high. And then we'll get a nice high blend. It only takes about a minute, not even, to blend this up into a nice, wonderful bisque-like texture, which is going to be what's really wonderful about it. That's all you need. And so it may have seemed really liquidy going in, but when we pour it right here back into our Dutch oven, you're going to see that we have a nice, thick, velvety texture. And that is mainly because of the sweet potatoes. They absorb a lot of liquid for our soup. But it's just going to make, look at this, just rich, velvety bisque right here, this nice kind of, which has those Indian notes to it, those spices, and that coconut flavor to it. Just going to be wonderful. Okay, we've got our sandwiches, and then let's get our applesauce things out. I think I'm going to pop them out, put them on a cutting board so that we can really glaze them up nicely. That way they'll have a good spot for them. That glaze can drip over. That out in just a second. But you can do the applesauce glaze just over the top, but if you want it to seep over to the sides, we'll pop them out and we'll put them on here so that it can drizzle down the sides, which gives you more of that sweetness flavor to it. So we'll just slide these in. We did oil them up, so they should pop out fairly decently well. There we go. And then we'll drizzle them with our vanilla glaze, which will give them just, again, a perfect little touch of sweetness. And you want to take, I will say, when you do mini loaves like this, because you don't have a like a liner in it, you want to take them out when they're still warm but not cooled, because if you wait until they cool, then they will stick to the sides of your pan. So you let them cool for a few minutes and then you take them out so that they will remove nice and easily like this. So you have these perfect little loaves that will just bake up nice and easy. Okay. Give these a nice drizzle with our vanilla glaze. There we go. This will go right over the top of them for this. This is a simple vanilla glaze going over our applesauce sourdough bread. So add a little bit of sweetness to it, but again, just a perfect little touch. We spice these up with my homemade apple pie spice blend and cinnamon, brown sugar, and vanilla. And then, of course, the applesauce, which is what keeps these so moist. And they're great when you're low on butter because I only used 1/4 of a cup in these. But that applesauce keeps them a very nice and lovely moist bread. Here we go. Beautiful. So while they're warm, it will continue to drizzle down on there. Let's get ready to serve up here. I'm going to grab a plate and a bowl. Oh, thank you, Judy. We appreciate that. Let me bring my little sandwiches over here. And bring my knife because we'll cut them in half. Okay. For lunch today, we have our Indian carrot squash soup made with garam masala, ginger, garlic, turmeric, carrots, sweet potatoes, and butternut squash. It's a lovely, rich bisque. We used coconut milk in there as well, which really enhances on that nice sweetness of it. And then we made a simple Italian BMT on our homemade buns. So we have ham, salami, pepperoni, and Gouda cheese. And again, these are our homemade yeast buns. And then for a little sweet treat at the end, we have our delicious apple cider or applesauce bread with our homemade vanilla glaze that is now melted over the top, and it's just going to add a touch of sweetness, which will be perfect and delicious. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. So our Indian carrot soup and our applesauce bread, and you can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Vitamix, my Hexclad griddle pan, my Dutch ovens, knives, cutting boards, all the different things that I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us